come. It is that internal process we go through to make the external change. So transition is a shift from one state of being to another. Listen here, my friend. Do you know that transition is one of the primary causes of stress? Not change, but transition. Let me give you an example of both change and transition used in a scenario. Let's say, for instance, I just bought a new house. What does that entail? Well, my house is on the other side of town, so it entails a couple of things. First of all, I have to reorient myself to new neighbors. I've become familiar with my neighborhood. And because the house is new, I'm going to have to become familiar with the new appliances that are in the house. And then I'm going to have to learn a new way to get to work. Now, even though I've made a significant change by moving from one area to another area, unless I'm willing to let go of the old, maybe it's that neighbor who I always drink coffee with. While they can still be friends, they're not going to be that next door neighbor I can just walk across the yard and begin to talk to. So it's not until I let go of my old toaster. I like that little dial on my old toaster. Now my new toaster is all digital. It's not until I begin to let go that I've properly transitioned. Otherwise, it would just be a change. You know, there's many times where people have made changes, but yet they have not transitioned. That's why it's so important to understand the difference between change and transition. Let me sum it up to you like this. As you notice on my PowerPoint, I just sum it up very briefly by saying, change is something external that happens to you, and transition is the process that happens internally. So just remember, until you become comfortable with the new and you're willing to let go of the old, we are still in transition. Now, change and transition affects every area of life. We all face challenges, both wanted and unwanted, in every aspect of our lives, both professionally and personally. Let me give you some example of some professional changes that may have transpired in your workplace, even some personal examples I'm going to give you here so that you can see how these changes basically occur on a day-to-day basis. What are some examples of changes that you've experienced, let's say, for instance, in your workplace? I'm sure many of you can write me and email me many examples of how you have a new boss now, how you basically have taken on more responsibility, or how you probably have been moved to a different department. What you have to do is listen to change. You have to ask questions about the change. How do you handle change? Because as we see many companies on the verge during this recession trying to make it in these times, you're going to see a lot of restructuring. You're going to actually see a lot of merging. I was just reading how Starbucks, I can remember years ago, how prosperous this company was reporting profits. Now they're closing down stores nationally. And even though while they're still in existence, they're having to restructure because of our economic times. So because of this restructuring for slow growth, it's going to affect everyone. In the legal industry, if you're in the medical field, it doesn't really matter. If you're in the educational field, there will be some type of restructuring. But my friend, don't panic. Don't fear. Because it's in this particular market of change and transition is where you can prosper the most, where you can be in good health. No more nights of you staying up all night wondering about your bills and your job, whether or not you're going to be furloughed. Listen, change and transition happens to us daily. Let me move on to my PowerPoint presentation because I want to show you a couple of other areas in which companies experience change. Have you worked somewhere where there's great diversity now? Let me talk to you about this particular aspect of change, accepting diversity in the workplace. You know, the time where men are the primary providers. I've heard men always talk about how their whole identity was based on them providing for their families. And while this is a great role, an important role, what we've come to realize is that women no longer are bringing home the bacon, they're bringing home the whole pig. Because we're just not living in times where you have one sole provider anymore. Now, husband and wife have both decided to move outside of the rims of the home, to start businesses, to work, and now we have two people with two different incomes trying to make ends meet. Now, just as those times have changed, also in work environments, we're seeing great diversity. We're seeing women come in as becoming presidential leaders in their company now. We're seeing African Americans leading now. We're seeing all types of diversity within corporate America, which now entails even workshops that we have to do, basically called diversity in the workplace, so people can know how to adjust and accept leadership roles from those who they're not used to accepting leadership roles from before. Let me give you a prime example of diversity in the workplace as far as change is concerned. I never forget, my wife and I, we attend these Christmas parties. And it was so funny because we had a very diversified group, and I noticed when they played country and western, a certain group will dance. I noticed when they played R&B, another group would stand up and dance. I noticed when they played Motown, you had different mingling groups that would get up and dance. And I sat back and I watched this and I began to laugh, because what I began to realize is that's the culture we've been brought up in. That's the way we've been molded. We've been molded to accept certain things and not accept certain things, and that's called prejudices. Prejudice is not a bad word. It just means that I've been sort of brought up to view things differently. And the things I don't understand, even though some people may have a fear of that, that's right. People usually fear what they don't understand. That's why it's so important to get knowledge in the areas where you don't have clear understanding. So therefore, what you will find out is that in the midst of change and transition, diversity in the workplace won't be as bad as you think. Let's take a look at our second objective here. Integration of new departments. Let me talk about that briefly. Have you ever been in a company and then all of a sudden, you have your own space, you have your own office, and, got plenty of room too. Then there's this memo that comes across your desk, or this company meeting that's called, and all of a sudden you get the news that you guys are about to merge with another branch or another department or another organization. It happens all the time. And being able to bring in someone in your company, and you remember all that space you have, now you no longer have it, because this new department, these new people who've come in to join your company are taking over that empty space. Most people don't like that, but it's all a part of change and transition. Let's take a look at our next bulleted item, a new service provider. We're talking about how change is inevitable. Let's talk about this particular bullet for a second, the new service provider. Now, if you're like me, I'm sure you probably have been experimenting with different types of services. I remember at one point I had one cable company as my provider for my phone. Also, I had a cable company as provider for my cable service. And then, of course, I had the internet by another company. Now you're noticing sort of like the Microsoft Office and Lotus Suite. You know how they're bundling everything together? Like in Microsoft Office, you can get Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Access, all bundled together, and it's entitled Microsoft Office Professional. We're seeing these same services offered by DirecTV, by Comcast Cable, by Verizon Fios. They're taking their services for long distance and telephone and cable and digital TV, and they're bundling them all together so that it can be more appealing and more cheaper to their customers to provide the service. But most people who are comfortable with their services but notice that their bill is going up and up, or they're getting poor